Ben, did you want to?
Yes.
So I'll just stop sharing.
Cool. Let me just get myself prepped. Hopefully you can see a slide up there.
Yep.
Good. So we're just going to cover over kind of really what the differences are and how you need to sort of approach thinking about getting access to your data if you're on Business Central. And I think there's various aspects to cover. So clearly there's the reporting aspect. There's also probably queries about integration and things like that. This is primarily going to be focused on the reporting side, but we can touch on some of the integration pieces too, because actually there's a fair amount of crossover in kind of the methods. So there are two flavors of Business Central available. So we've got public cloud versus on-premise. So SaaS public cloud, so that is where we're seeing the most growth, certainly with Business Central as a product and where our recent Bevica implementations have been. And obviously we're developing Bevica to work fully on the public cloud, so there's never going to be an on-premise only version as far as we're thinking at the moment. When we talk about on-premise, bear in mind that can either be on-premise on your physical premises, i.e. your own servers, etc. It can also be on a private cloud, so you could spin that up virtual machines or something like that on Azure in order to do that, or if you have your own cloud infrastructure, then that's certainly possible. So just bear that in mind when we talk about SaaS or public cloud, that is the Microsoft managed service. If we talk about on-premise at any point, that's essentially you're looking after the servers. So really, just a brief summary of what the difference is. So on the left, you've obviously got SaaS. So you're accessing it through the internet. So, even if you're in your own offices, for example, it's still going over the wire. So there are some considerations you need to think about with that. And that's for every kind of access. It's serverless and it is a managed service. So essentially all of the technical bits, server maintenance, SQL Server, indexing, anything like that, it's all, you don't need to worry about that anymore. So it's all managed by Microsoft. And the thing that they then have is an enormous amount of intelligence about how all of their Business Central users are using the product. So we are seeing improvements through the roadmap process to various aspects of the system. So in general for just performance, but also with specific reports and features where they're obviously noticing things on the telemetry which they are looking at. So essentially they have a list of basically the operations that are happening in the background and can spot any bottlenecks and things like that. It also means things like SQL tuning and things like that will happen in the background without you knowing about it. Claudio touched on this earlier, but we've obviously got the wave updates. So you've got the auto updates that are happening. There's monthly hot fixes, which is something that we've, has always happened. They are applied basically automatically in the background and pretty much seamlessly. And obviously we're doing our own assurance whenever that happens to make sure Bevica is still going to work with that. They are hot fixes, so that they're bug fixes, etc. They're not usually new features. That's where the wave updates come in, and we don't have a time window to implement them. From that point of view, or from an IT point of view, that should be seamless. So you shouldn't notice anything. We've got native integration, so all of the Power Platform, which obviously Claudio touched on, so that's Power Automate, Power Apps, Power BI, that is all basically natively available, as are integrations into or access to things like the Azure platform and obviously Office 365 or Microsoft 365 as it's branded now, and things like Teams and emails and things like that. So that is kind of out of the box integration with those. Clearly there are security considerations in terms of an admin on your Microsoft 365 tenant needs to make sure they're turned on, etc. But generally it's kind of you set it and it's done. There are some things to understand. It's a public service. It's a public cloud service, so there are API limits. which are documented. What does that mean in reality? It means that there is a limit on the number of calls that you can put in on a minute, and we can share the details of that separately, or a data throughput limit. Now we've got a number of clients on SaaS, both Bevica and otherwise, using various methods of integration, things like that, and we're not finding that the API limits are causing an issue for anyone, and that is partly actually about design choices which are made kind of when we build our integrations, so that we're aware of it. You have sandboxes, so think of those as what we traditionally call test databases, and so you can have 3 of those per production environment. Usually you're going to have 1 production environment, so that's your live company, or sorry, your live database, which can have your multiple companies in it. And then you can have up to 3 sandboxes, and they are super simple to create. So creating a copy of one is literally, you know, a click of 3 buttons, and then it just runs in the background, and probably within 15 minutes, obviously depends on the amount of data, you've got a new test or sandbox database there, with a copy of your production data, and it's turned off kind of things that might cause a problem, like emailing things out or something like that. The other thing that is worth bearing in mind is we have good access. So as a partner, we have partner level access, which means that we can administer the service. We have access into your system, so without having to kind of go onto your infrastructure, we're just authenticating through us as users on Azure Active Directory. So we've got access to the admin portal in the background and the application as well. So the web service, that's in the application. By that I mean the web client. We as partners don't have any access to kind of the underlying platform, so we don't have access to SQL, we don't have access to the servers physically or anything like that, or through remote desktop or anything like that. So just comparing that to on-premise, which most of you are obviously on, obviously you're accessing that depending on where you are over the internet, or on your own local network, or your network. You have servers to manage, so you've got servers to spin up, maintain, you've got licensing and management on that, so there's 2 servers at least that are required. So you've got the database server, the SQL server, plus an application server. For those of you who have obviously done implementations, then you'll be aware normally we recommend you have 2 separate ones, they can be on one, etc., etc. But essentially you are responsible for them. You have all the other kind of infrastructure that goes around that, so firewalls, ports, opening up things. Updates are not seamless, that's one thing. They are then an installation, so kind of like a mini update, if you like. So and there is a part of the SLA from Microsoft is that you have to have been on the latest update within 18 months. So you can't now be on kind of a very aged version in order to stay in Microsoft support. But I hope, you know, one of the things which we should get across, and hopefully people understand, is the update process is so much easier now, particularly the way that we're designing Bevica as well, and the actual way that the stuff is coded now. You still have access to all the other things, so Power Platform, edit in Excel, Microsoft 365 kind of apps and things like that, but you have to go through a few more steps in order to set that up with your Azure Active Directory. You've got full access and control, so even if you are using web services to access data, you determine what your API limits are going to be. Now there are implications of that, obviously, because it depends on how hard your servers are going to be hit, etc. You do then have to, you know, you don't have the same simplicity of creating sandboxes and things like that, so it's a case of backup and restore to create test databases and things like that. And from an access point of view, T-Vision need access, so we need access to your application. So usually we'd have access to your network, usually we'd have access to your servers plus the application as well. So just some considerations around that. Now I think the thing that we would say is it's worth taking all of these decisions in the round. You know, from our point of view, we would encourage everybody to go SaaS. As far as we're concerned at the moment, there's no limitation to not go in SaaS, but obviously for certain clients, SaaS is not their preference for various reasons. And I would always say that if you're going to make a decision between should we go SaaS or should we go on premise, don't just make that decision based on, say, how we're going to access data or concerns around that. you know, it's worth engaging in sort of the pros and cons of this to understand what the various implications might be for that. There is lots of documentation in terms of some of the things that happen with SaaS, so things about database size and things like that, that we can obviously share if people are interested. Now, when you think about public cloud, bear in mind it is a public shared service. So, you know, there is always the risk that there may be access issues. And this did happen recently. So Business Central was down for approximately an hour several weeks ago. And there was one tweet which I thought was quite interesting, which was, yes, whilst you may be at the kind of reliant on Microsoft or in order to kind of have access to the system, it is worth thinking about, you know, who are the people who are going to be bug fixing that and trying to get that back up versus your own kind of IT team or your own IT people, if you like. And, you know, actually it was back up within approximately an hour on that, and it was a kind of, you know, it was a service outage. We're not denying that, but, you know, it recovered very quickly. And, you know, it's just worth thinking about those kind of overheads because you're not having to worry about quite so much. But again, it's something to consider. Just in terms of the security model, so it's worth thinking about that because when you're accessing any data or accessing the system, you have to think about that. So SaaS is all going through Azure Active Directory, so you can turn on things like multi-factor authentication and things like that. One thing that will be happening for any external access is basic authentication. So that is essentially a username and a password. So by that, it's a web service app integration. So traditionally, you could go on, find a user and create a web service access key. So that was just a long string of random characters, essentially, that would be the password. That's going to be deprecated in SaaS from next year. So everything now is going through OAuth 2. So that's either at a user level, so that's, you know, authenticating as a user to access the data, or it's actually as an app. So if there are integrations being built out, then actually there's a process which has to be gone through to register that integration as an app, which then means there's a slightly different way to authenticate rather than through as a user. But one thing to consider is no longer will basic authentication be allowed from next year. So, you know, if we are kind of in mid-flight of a project or we're thinking about a project, it is just worth bearing that in mind. And it's worth sort of trying to do it through OAuth now too, OAuth 2 now. When you look at on-premise, it's exactly the same. Basic, so you can, you know, it's still through Azure Active Directory, it's still through OAuth 2. The difference and why they're starred there is because you have a few more bit of setup to do from your side just to make that all fit together. Basic web service access keys will still be allowed. There's no fixed date on that, but it's likely to be deprecated in the longer term. But you do still have access directly to your database. So you've got access to SQL. But please, if you're going to access that, make sure it's read-only. You should never really be putting any data in there that's going to be used by the program. So the way that Business Central is now designed is it's something called object orientated. So I will admit I borrowed this from elsewhere. And if anyone's got any technical questions, I'm sure Andrea can answer some of these later. But primarily, what does it mean? It means that if you want to access anything within the system, you're going through something which defines the scope of what you're going to get. So the main reason for doing that, really, if we just sort of cut through it all, is it just makes it easier to maintain and upgrade. So rather than kind of having just one massive piece of code, which we're adding in, you know, your custom code, that's no longer the model which we do it. And it's the same with kind of accessing it. So if you're accessing it through a web service or something like that, it is a predefined object. So you are calling something which says you call it with this parameters or, you know, this type of call, and this is the data that we're going to give you back. So there's no kind of select star from, you know, customer ledger entries or something like that. It has to be defined in advance. So just, you know, some things to consider with that. Okay, so how do we then access data? Okay, well, there's two ways really. Public cloud. Okay, so what have we got? We've got the Business Central client. So that is you accessing Business Central through a web client, and we can look at some of the things that we can do around that. We've got OData. we've got SOAP, which are the ones that we've had for quite a long time within Business Central. But the new one now is that we now have APIs, so that is a RESTful API web service. They are all predefined objects, just as I said. So we're specifying, you know, what is being accessed and what is going to be returned. So essentially, generally, you're looking at tables and fields, but it could be a function as well. And as I'm trying to explain here, it also can be data or function. So data could be something like item ledger entries. Give me the item ledger entry number, the item number, the posting date, and the quantity from the item ledger entries. It could be a function, so it could be a case of saying, dear Business Central, can I please get the balance for Claudio's account, please? And in which case we can just return something like that. It could be a sort of, you know, functions could be within some of that data things. So you could call the customer record, for example, as part of that return of Claudio's name and address. You could also get his balance. But the fundamental thing is that everything is going through one of these. So it's going through the Business Central client, and really that means end users doing something, or it's going through three types of web service. So SOAP, OData, or APIs. There are some differences between what they are, but you know, capability wise, there's nothing that can't really be done through that. So what's the difference if you're on premise? Well, you still get the same access. Okay, I've missed off BC client here, but you have the SQL level access. So, you know, and there's pros and cons about that. You know, it can mean that you have access to all of that, so it's quite easy to respond to queries because people will do that, whereas obviously if you have to go through another object, you do have to kind of think about it a bit more and plan it out, I guess, slightly more. So that is primarily the difference. All of these are still available, so APIs, SOAP, OData, Business Central clients still available, but you can also then go down to a SQL level, or you could go through a kind of mixed model of that if you wanted to. And really, when we're talking about accessing SQL, as we've tried to explain earlier, that's data out. So I wouldn't be expecting any kind of integrations going back in, ideally. All of these web services, yes, we can push data out, we can take data in, we can respond to things, so we can return things. There are also technical things we can do in terms of webhooks and things like that, but it's not something that we're going to cover and discuss today. Okay, and Andrea's here, so any technical questions, we can go into that a bit later. So really, what are the options then around accessing Business Central? And primarily here we're going to be looking at SaaS. So Business Central client, okay, it's worth just mentioning that, and we find this with a lot of implementations where people are coming from other systems. What traditionally has been thought of as a report is not a report within Business Central, it's just a list view that's filtered. So if I just jump out of this a second. So here's Business Central. So this is one of our, this is actually one of our Bevica environments here, and I've gone to the item ledger entries here. So what can I do from here? Well, there's a few useful things. One is open in Excel. So I can take this list here and open it in Excel. Okay. Usually what I'd say about this is it's kind of quick and dirty reporting, is how I always think about it. You've got a list of data which you want to get out and you need to do something on it. So now, guys, I've got this just button for open in Excel. And when that file opens, you can see I've got the data in here. Okay, and from that I can do whatever I need to do. Now you can see there it's returned just nearly 5,000 rows and it was pretty quick. There are some limitations around the amount of data that will be returned. I will dig those out and make sure they're on there. It's reasonably significant in terms of the amount of data, but you will be waiting for a while. So, you know, if you're returning a lot of data in edit in Excel or open in Excel, you are going to, you know, suffer from some performance lags while you're just waiting for that to go over the wire. The other one that's worth mentioning, which I won't show right now, is edit in Excel. Not relevant for item ledger entries because you can't actually edit them. But journals, for example, if you're doing a general journal, you can actually spit it out into Excel, populate it in Excel, and then push it back in kind of natively within here. You also get all the standard kind of filtering stuff. One good thing that's new, which is, you know, new to Business Central anyway, is being able to search up here. So this is kind of your quick search. So if I go B94, hopefully if I've put that in right, then that's actually kind of filtered the list down. So that's kind of like your quick search, but it's also any field on the page. So you don't actually have to define which field you want to look at here. So I could put in stopper and it's picking that. You've still got the standard filters in here, so you can filter the list by any of the fields. So you've got the visible fields, and you've also got all the table fields, as you would have with Nav. And you also then have limit total filters. So same way that Nav's always worked, which then obviously reduces the amount of data that you're going to pull through and get things through. So when we're looking at item ledgers, really that's raw kind of data. So there's potentially a lot of data in there. So just one thing to think about is you're going over the wire, so you're always going over the internet. So it is worth thinking about how you might want to rationalize down or consolidate that data. And one useful thing that is already within Business Central and has been in now for a long time is analysis views. So within here, again, I'm not going to go into kind of how to use them, but one of the great things here, and you have analysis views which can be done over your general ledger entries, you can have them done over your item ledger entries. So with item ledger entries, that means you can analyze sales or purchases or just stock movements. You've got a date compression here. So the key thing here is you can actually compress entries by day, by week, by month. So generally speaking, for finance, it might be okay just to aggregate that down by month. So what does that mean? You've got 1,000 GL entries that have gone into account number 6100 in that month, and there were 5 different dimensions on those. Then actually you could end up with just 5 entries at the end of the day. So particularly when you're then thinking about, well, I'm going to export that data for analysis in another solution. Actually, if you can pre-aggregate the data within Business Central first, it saves some of the data. It saves us kind of the amount of data that's going to have to go through. So, as with Nav, and as you've always had with Nav, there's quite a lot you can do within the client. There's obviously all the pre-canned kind of reports as well. So, there's various reports in there. Finance ones are generally pretty strong because they're fairly generic. Some of the sales ones are probably a bit more, or purchase ones, for example, probably require a bit more thought and analysis on, particularly for users, I think, just because everybody kind of has slightly different businesses and ways to run them. So that's kind of Business Central. So there's a lot you can do within that, but I'm not suggesting that that is a reporting solution or even an integration solution, but just bear in mind there is still a lot you can do within that, and you can get out data very easily still. So then we're looking at web services. So as we said before, everything needs to be object orientated. So that means it's predefined. There are some limitations on what an end user or even a super user can do within Business Central. So you can't just create your own web service. You cannot just say, actually, I want the item ledger entries and I want this field, and this field. What you can do is, if the item ledger entries web service already exists, you can pare that down, or you can do some aggregation over it. So you can say some aggregate and things like that, but you can't just create a new one from scratch. Various types of web services available now. So you've got RESTful APIs. So that's a new feature to Business Central. I know that certainly there's been questions on Bevica User Groups over the years about when will RESTful APIs be available. Well, they're there. We've got pages, so that's just a way to present data, really. You've got queries, so queries are the most performative in terms of getting data out in a kind of a structured table. And then you've got functions as well, so that's where you might be, as I was saying earlier, calling a function saying give me the balance or give me the stock figure or something like that. Depending on the setup, they can be full create, read, update, delete. The other thing that I've actually neglected to put on here is you can also, one of the good things about SaaS is actually what happens in the background is there is a replication of your database happening constantly in the background, fully managed by Microsoft. What we can do is when we create a web service, we can actually say, don't go to the live database, actually go to the replicated copy to get that data. So that then means there's no impact on your production database. If you're integrating, so if it's a website, and obviously we've got a kind of a little diagram here of that. that's not going to be relevant. So because it needs to be in a live production, but so that's a Business Central presenting data out through an API to your website. Website's doing something, probably getting a sales order back. That's going into Business Central, becoming a sales order. So that's a kind of typical flow which we might see. But that would need to be live data. But for reporting purposes, so whether that's going into Power BI or anything, you can actually say, just give me the replicated data, so it doesn't have to be live. These web services can be consumed by many applications, so absolutely loads of them. And if you have a look at, say, Excel, Microsoft Excel 365, or even some of the older versions, they can access OData as standard, and it's kind of the connections also that say Power BI will use. Under the hood, when you look at the Power Apps, that's actually going through the APIs as well. So they're just predefined, and there are the API limits. So just in terms of what are the API limits, so it's all documented here. So that is all kind of available publicly, and as we sort of explained or tried to explain earlier, we've not seen any issues with that so far with any of the integrations that we're looking at, but that's partly around design decisions which we made. There are a load of out-of-the-box APIs as well, so again we'll share these links later, so you can see there's a lot of them here. So you've got accounts, so GL accounts and things like that, contacts, customers, bits and pieces like that. When we come down to some of these other ones like purchase orders and purchase order lines, they're actually built out more for integration. So the idea of that another program might want to push in a purchase order or a purchase order line rather than getting data out for reporting purposes. But we, T-Vision, we can author APIs as well. And actually for Bevica, we started building out a standard suite of ones for reporting. And we've got some for integration purposes as well, so sort of web services type things. So that's kind of talking about web services, and there's loads of different consumption methods for that. Obviously, it depends on kind of what solution is taking that data. So how does Power BI fit into here? Okay, well, Power BI actually uses the API connectors now. So it used to go through OData. They've updated it recently, I think around June or July time, so it now uses the API connectors. Just need to be aware of data latency. It is not a live connection into Business Central, okay? It is that usually you're going to author your report in Power BI Desktop, you'll publish it to the service, so publish it to the Power BI service in the cloud. You will then set data refresh policies. With a pro license, which is the kind of £7.50, I think it's £7.50 at the moment license per user per month. You can refresh data up to 8 times a day. If you go for the sort of premium tier, so there are some premium tiers, I don't particularly think there's a big need for most of our clients to use those, but there may be particular cases you can increase the number of data refreshes. But the one thing to really understand with that is never a live connection to Business Central when it's in the service, when it's in the Power BI service. And then you've got your Power BI reports. You can embed your Power BI reports into Business Central as well, which is quite neat. So it just means that users can kind of can see those instead of, say, a fact box. So you can create a little fact box which might give you a bit more data, or a way of presenting the data, say, about your customer or your items in a slightly different way. How easy is it to connect Business Central? It's very easy. So here I am, I'm in Power BI Desktop. If I just go into Get Data, I can go to Online Services. I've got Business Central. You can notice there's an on-premise one there. So on-premise is available. Again, you just have a few more hoops and lumps to go through. There are things like Dynamics Nav, for example. Just bear in mind that doesn't mean that you can just say, oh, well, let's turn that on. You need to open up ports and web services and things like that to do that. So Dynamics Business Central here. Okay, it's authenticated. I've pre-authenticated here as the user. I've got access to my environments here. So I can pick my production environment, which was the one that we were just looking at. I can find my company, so Bevica Bug in this case. And this is where it changed from sign of June. So you had web service legacy, so that was accessing kind of the traditional OData web services, but now you've got advanced APIs and standard APIs. Okay, so if we have a look at the advanced ones, T-Vision have got one here for Bevica. But if we just have a look at, say, the standard ones, I've already done the accounts. So let's just see if I can find general ledger entries. There's general ledger entries. Click that, load it. And that is now just going to refresh the data, so pull it through. At this point, it is getting the data live. Bear in mind, this is a demo database. There's not that much data in there. So this is about report authoring at this point. So yes, you can get the data out live, but you need to be aware you're going to be sitting there waiting for it to refresh. And if you have lots of data, so you're looking at all of your GL entries, or you've got lots and lots of different endpoints in there, it could take some time to do it. Okay, it's entirely dependent on the data. And then within here,
Ben, sorry, quick question.
Yeah.
Is it possible to link directly to those account schedules?
No.
Okay.
Is the short answer. Yeah, you can build out account schedules within Business Central. Really, they're a presentation layer of, they're a way to kind of filter the entries that are underlying it. So natively, no, you can't just pull out an account schedule and say, do this. There is, well, with the detail, one thing you can do actually is I can go to account schedules. If I search account schedule, I've got a KPI web service set up. So that was, I was actually, there's two ways, there is a way to do it. What you can do is basically select your account schedules which you've created within Business Central. You can then publish them as a web service, which means that you can access them within Power BI, but they are flat. They don't really have any drill through capability. So it will give you the display, the same kind of display as you would have within Business Central, but you're not going to be able to within Power BI drill down to the underlying data. It's just literally creating the framework to give you the way that your account schedule would look within Business Central.
But on the analysis by dimensions, when we aggregated the data, you could send that aggregated data to Power BI.
You can access the underlying aggregated data, yes. So yeah. But then you've got to kind of build out the display layer over the top, I guess is the best way to think about it. So yeah, it's not you. So you've got, I can export my account schedules through this KPI web service setup. That will give me the account schedules basically as they'd appear within Business Central. I can't drill down to the underlying data within Power BI, but it can be a way to just kind of share that information around the company. Okay. But again, people could look straight within Business Central potentially. If you then want to use that kind of underlying data to do some kind of macro analysis, as I'd say, then you've got to kind of build out a data model in order to do that.
I have a question, Ben, if I may.
Yep.
Peter, sorry. Is there, do you have access to all data in the SQL database? Are there any tables? Is there anything that you can't get access to?
Through on a public cloud?
In SaaS.
In SaaS, okay, you've got no direct access to the SQL database. We can create a web service to access any of the tables and any of the fields. There are probably some system tables which we can't do it on, but no, there is no limitation in terms of what we can access as developers in order to give you access to it. You can't just natively access it. So when I was in here, when I was in Power BI a second ago, and if I do get data, once it wakes itself up, this is not giving me access to every single table within Business Central. This is giving me access to the APIs which have been predefined. So if we just come back to, so
and those APIs, are they predefined by you? Can we say to you, can you create an API for us?
Okay, so standard APIs here, these are all predefined by Microsoft. Under the advanced APIs, you can see there's some other ones here. We've got one here for T-Vision, Bevica BI, so these are ones which we've produced. So yes, the short answer is you can say, I want customers with these fields on here. So here we go, we've got one in here which we've already done, and then that's available.
Do you see in the future a way of the customer being able to control that? Because part of the enjoyment I have at the moment, I say, is that I don't have to think too much in advance about what I want to do. I can just go, I need this, and I can just go and get it. Whereas now I'd have to put in a request. Ben, can you set up can you create an API for me? And then a week later, I've lost the will to live.
Yeah, there's nothing on the roadmap so far around that.
Okay.
I think, yeah, I think that flexibility has pros and cons.
Sure.
One thing, it means that you're I need to be careful what I say here. Your MD, for example, can come to you and say, Peter, I need this report on my desk tomorrow, and you can scrabble around and access all the various tables in order to do it. And you can react to that. You don't have that same flexibility as such. Okay. So you do need to plan it out. But then it actually comes down to, if you're building out a reporting suite, we should be sitting down at the outset and planning it out, really.
Sure.
So it is in some ways, but again, if we go back to that kind of slide earlier on, you need to take that decision for you as a company in the round. So I wouldn't say that, oh God, Claudia might come to me tomorrow and say, I need this report, and you don't have access to that. Actually what you could probably do is just go into Business Central, find the table, export it out into Excel, and do a pivot on it, possibly. It depends on the complexity, obviously. But, and again, in most cases, if you're talking about, if we look at the Business Central, the ones which we developed at the moment, so we've got most of the things I think that people would want in there. I'm not saying it covers everything, but we've got customers, sales information, we've got finance information, we've got item information, item ledger information, etc. So yeah.
And there's no limit to the number of APIs you can have?
No, where you will run into a limit is the consumption of those APIs. So let's say you've got a Power BI model with 100 tables in there, or 100 data bits in there. That's got to refresh 100 of them. So then you start hitting those API limits, and there is, and we'll get onto this in a bit, there is a practical limitation at some point where your reporting requirements may mean that things have to be structured in a different way. So there are tools within Power BI, for example, where you can do incremental refreshes. They don't behave that well over web services because of the way that they do it technically. So it may be that actually you've got so many entries and 10 years worth of data that you want to report on. It's more appropriate to build out a kind of data warehouse to hold that data and populate that data warehouse with Business Central data. But we're sort of jumping ahead of ourselves a bit there. And
pulling that amount of data out is obviously into data warehouse. That's generally just a sort of one-off task. You're pulling out all the historical data, and then you're, as you say, you're incrementally updating it. So you're not going to hit those API limits because you've just pulled all the data. Yeah, essentially, you're saying, generally your records of your information records, or your dimensions, as a sort of from a data analysis point of view. So customers and items, you can probably refresh them in full every day, overnight. GL entries, item ledger entries, any kind of fact tables, records of transactions, that's where you go incremental. So yes, and then actually how many GL entries are you likely to have in a day? Outside data migration, then you're not going to hit those API limits, and usually you're refreshing it overnight as well. So actually, if it takes an hour to refresh, it doesn't matter as such. So there are the limitation, or there are considerations, because short term Power BI could be perfect. You say, brilliant, I can get access to all that data. Actually, further down the line, it may be some implications for that. But bear in mind that from Microsoft's point of view, it's, to be quite blunt, is revenue subscription for them if you use Business Central and Power BI. So and things like the API connector is new. Well, why have they done that? To try and get more people to use Business Central and Power BI. So I would expect that you'll see performance improvements coming through on that, essentially, as well, because it's all on their own infrastructure, the underlying platform. So it's in their interest to do it, I'd say. Cool.
Ben,
thank you.
He's got his hand up.
Yeah.
Hi, Ben. I think from what I've seen with the SaaS product, and I'm probably concurring with Peter there, that the ability, not having the ability to access the tables directly is pretty major. I mean, I don't think anybody can plan their reporting requirements going forward for the next 3 weeks, let alone for the future proofing it. So if something goes wrong in the system, we can write a quick exception report to pick it out going forward, spot errors, that sort of thing. And also we have multiple databases on our SQL server. So to isolate our division SQL would probably be quite a disadvantage. So just feedback for you there, the SaaS product looks pretty restrictive compared to the on-premise from my point of view.
I think it's about thinking about that from the outset in the round. So I wouldn't, you know, there are pros and cons to all of these things. You know, one big pro is you know, you don't have to manage any of that infrastructure. And so the upside of that may actually mean that we're actually building out some other way to get that data from Business Central into an on-premise SQL database for our reporting purposes. Maybe, you know, time worth investing. You know, it's a decision that each business needs to make, I think. Yeah, I think reporting wise, actually in most reporting situations, I don't think the scope of the kind of underlying data which you need to access is going to change that much. If I talk about pure reporting, ignoring your exception report, something's gone wrong, actually in some ways that is about building out the product to try and stop things going wrong in the first place, I guess. But, you know, if you're talking about core reporting, it doesn't generally change that much, or there's not suddenly an urgent need where somebody says, oh, how have you not got that? You know, we need item data. Well, you built out a reporting suite, you've talked about it, so your item data is already there. And once those APIs are there as well, they're there. So, you know, and it's not a huge amount of effort for us to build a new one. You know, the tool for us to build it is flexible and relatively easy to do it. It's separating them out is the key thing. So you're not trying to do loads of really clever stuff on the API in order to get out the data. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, I think it's more feedback really, but I think you describe a magical world of future proofing, and I wait to be impressed and see it all in action. Yeah,
fair enough. But yeah, I think, you know, it's we're pro SaaS, but, you know, we do appreciate there are different businesses have different requirements, and there are concerns around that, and that's why we're having this discussion. So, you know, we're not trying to force people down one route, we're just trying to give you the information. So that sort of Power BI, so it is dead easy to connect as a thing to understand. So the other options that you have as well, so Jet Reports, which I know we've kind of we've looked at a number of times. So what does that mean? We access it through Excel. There is a license cost to that, so it's a subscription model. One thing you do have access to with Jet though is you have access to any table or any field within the database. So they have their own connector within Business Central, which allows them to go to any field, any table and any field within there. And it also is live access. Okay, but that comes with its drawback. Live access means you've got to pull out all the entries. So Jet is not suitable as kind of what I call an analysis type reports, where you're looking at lots and lots of data. Generally for finance data, where you're looking at, say, a month-end report or something like that, or it's a limited scope in terms of the amount of data, I think that works really well. It's very flexible. You know, actually you've got access directly to all that data then. But, you know, when you're talking about bigger analysis, I don't think that is the solution, but it's worth considering. So the other one is then looking at Jet Analytics. So Jet Analytics is kind of the Jet Report bigger brother, and it is a proper kind of analytics reporting solution. So there's a license cost to that, so you're paying for the software. There's some server requirements, so you need to have a SQL, you shouldn't say SQL analysis, SQL server and SQL analysis services. So you need two databases. Now, one of the things that has access to is, again, it goes to that magic Jet connector. So any table and any field is available. And basically what the whole kind of solution does is it automates and helps you build through the steps of getting the data out of Business Central using the Jet API. So any table, any field, creating a data warehouse, doing conversions and extract, transform, load kind of operations on that, building a cube and then deploying that cube, and also documenting it. And it also comes with a suite of built-in of kind of out-of-the-box cubes for standard Business Central as well. So, you know, finance, sales, purchases, things like that. So that is, you know, it's a really powerful tool, and that gives you access potentially to all of the data within Business Central. But again, it's not, you're not accessing, it's not like you're running a it's not like you're accessing your own the SQL server directly in order to get the data out directly. You still need to remember it's going to be a refresh in order to get up-to-date data. But it does mean then you've got a data warehouse which you can then, you know, run your own reports on as well. So, you know, if you talk about item ledger entries or something like that, you could have access to all the item ledger entries in your data warehouse, which you could then, you know, run your own analysis or reports on the back of, which is just a SQL database at that point. So you're then kind of in comfortable territory. But what you're not going to have access to is kind of, oh, hang on a minute, what happened 5 minutes ago with that? You know, really, you're looking at probably an overnight update for those kind of data. But, you know, that does come with a cost, but it is very, very powerful and very flexible and kind of gives you all that access. There are other options as well. So a bit like the BBC, there are other options available. So you've got the whole Dataverse, which is something that Claudia mentioned before. So really that's kind of an underlying integration platform for kind of all this Power Platform and stuff like that. It's not kind of a data warehouse on its own. So usually that might act as a kind of, if you're merging in lots of data, so Business Central, maybe you've got Dynamics CRM, you've got Power Automate and Flow and stuff like that. It's a way to kind of just have a single data set which is going to deal with those kind of things. When we're talking about just if it's Business Central and Power Apps, actually we can connect directly to Business Central, so Dataverse may not be required on that. But it's not kind of like it is not a reporting data warehouse is one thing to understand. You can use Azure Data Factories, that's an Azure service, to basically get data out of anywhere and put it anywhere. So that's not Business Central or SQL Server only. So that is kind of basically can access any data and put it anywhere. In reality, there's tons of connectors in there. You pay for that, obviously, but it's actually, in terms of the operational cost, it's actually pretty cheap. But you do need to build out that infrastructure. Now we've done some testing on that, and it works. You know, doing incremental refreshes is actually quite easy. Really, what it is it's SQL Server integration services, so the one below, but in the cloud. So if you have SQL Server integration services and you're familiar with that, well, you can use that to get out OData and things like that. And there are loads of other tools available as well. You know, we've had some clients who have built out their own things because they've got that skill set to be able to do that. There are lots of different ways to kind of get that data out. But fundamentally, the thing to remember is that it's always going to be going through a web service. So with a SaaS solution, whichever way you look at it, whichever tool you find, it is not going to be a native connection into the SQL Server. It is going to be going through a web service. So where Jet's good, or Jet Analytics, is that has access for you just to be able to say, I want that table and that field. Okay. If you're talking about using Azure Data Factory, SQL integration services, or another tool, you will need to come to T-Vision and say, I want this table and this field. You know, it could just be I want the table in full, frankly. So just bear in mind, whichever way you look at it, you still don't get access to the underlying database. Just some things I just wanted to clarify as well. Database backups. You can do a database backup for an on-premise, for a SaaS environment. However, that is a DR, a disaster recovery, a data compliance kind of thing, or a data migration. I'm moving to another system solution. There are limitations around the number of database backups you can take per month. So therefore it is not a reporting option, okay? Because you're never going to have live data. Performance wise, there are deployments of Business Central SaaS with thousands of users. So there are some very large companies out of there using it in the public cloud, and I'm sure they have data reporting requirements. Obviously, if they've got thousands of users, I imagine they have a fairly big IT team to help with that. And yeah, who do you want managing kind of your service and uptime? But
as we've sort of said all along, we're not trying to force you down any particular route. You know, we see SaaS as kind of the best way forwards, but that is entirely a decision for you and your business, and we can help advise on that and try and cover some of these things. And certainly if you're thinking about upgrading, please let's engage in conversations about data access and things like that, because there's a lot more information and detail that we can go into than we can do in sort of half-hour presentation. So I guess then, yes,
Peter has a question.
So I couldn't see the screen. Hello, Peter.
Hiya. On the DR side, is that a package that comes with? Is that all built into the SaaS model? Yeah.
So you get essentially there are automatic. I think they're geo-redundant. I'd need to double check that. Database backups from Microsoft. So essentially, if it falls over in one of their Azure data centers, it should just roll over and fire up in the other one pretty much seamlessly.
So that's all. In terms of backup,
they are taking a full database backup constantly. You don't have access to it though.
You can take backups that we can take for DR. Is that separate to their DR?
Yeah, so they're automatically creating backups of your database for failover purposes. So if the environment which you're in has the problem, it'll automatically just fire up on another environment. It should be pretty much seamless. You can extract out a full database backup on demand, or we can. It depends on the admin access that people have. But you are limited to the number you can do per month within that.
Sure.
So if you want a copy of it yourself, fine, you can do that. You have to have some Azure services in order to get that, etc., etc.
Sure.
But yes, but it's not kind of a reporting
sure.
solution, because you are limited by the number you can do for that. But yeah, in terms of kind of that, the compliance and service level agreement with Microsoft and stuff like that, yeah, again, it's your data's all backed up by them, and there's no additional service or cost for that. That's just part of your subscription.
Cool.
Nick, sorry.
Nick.
Yeah, Claudia, you mentioned earlier in the presentation that you had 6 SaaS implementations that went live in January.
Yep.
What is the proportion of that compared to on-premise? Are they all your implementations SaaS or some on-premise?
They're all SaaS in the cloud, Microsoft in the cloud.
So you've had no on-premise implementations this year?
No, we haven't.
Okay, it's interesting.
And that
I think at a really high level, people who are used to the old on-premise, the idea of what Ben's been talking about is a bit of a shock to the system. We do get that, which is why we're trying to talk about it. But we haven't yet seen a reason not to go SaaS. Now, it might be that there are, and there are, like Ben said, there's ways we can get around that. But at a high level, there are ways you can get to the data, you can do the reporting, going up to Jet Analytics, for example, and there you do have access to all the fields, all the data to be able to run a report in the next couple of hours that the MD's asked for example.
I have another question on the we talk about the updates from Microsoft, and you mentioned earlier on that the customer has to check on the hot fixes. Who is responsible for ensuring that nothing is broken when the hot fixes go in, and also the waves go in?
Are we talking SaaS or on-premise here?
SaaS.
So SaaS, Microsoft are responsible for Standard Business Central. We are responsible for Bevica and your customizations. So when a wave update comes, so hot fixes, okay, generally they are just an application fix. So there's a bug in the code. Yeah. So we check those in advance, obviously. And also what we will do is we create a copy of your production database as a sandbox, apply the update to that, and ask you to check it and test it. Okay, so that's your production data. Just check it, test it, make sure everything's working.
And how onerous is that? So I'm worried, for example, if we go on to SaaS, that then every month we're like, what, you've now got to do some work for us here. And I'm like, well, I don't have time to do that.
it's as onerous as you decide to make it, I guess. There isn't, in theory, we have I guess we know what the changes are, so we can advise you on that. It is a change. It's like a change request, really. If we put a change request in your system, you should be testing all the kind of all of the those transactions, all of the related transactions. So yeah, there's that. The wave ones as well. So sorry. Then yes, we obviously do our due diligence, and we don't release our Bevica update until we've done that. So we obviously have a time frame within which we need to do that. But there is always a slight delay before you going onto a wave update while we're making sure that Bevica works. Sorry, Claudia.
So if sorry, go on. Claudia.
Sorry, just to say the hot fixes are really just small bug fixes. It's the wave updates that have real new functionality about them.
So if you've got a heavily bespoke system or significant bespoke system, and therefore the onus is on the customer to then make sure that nothing is broken when the wave goes in. So the more customization you have, potentially the more work there is. I'm just trying to understand what kind of level that might get to. Is that where somebody might have to employ a member of staff, or every 6 months there's like a week's work to do, or something like that? It's a bit of a concern.
So we have technical tools. So when the wave update comes through, we are essentially at a code level checking for any clashes and potential issues. So there's that kind of due diligence which we do. So that's how will Bevica react to this. The way that it's architected, which I guess Andrea can explain, actually reduces some of that. So we're not actually changing the standard code. We're grabbing events and subscribers in order to, do bespoke things. So that makes a change, because actually it doesn't kind of matter what happens to the standard code if we circumnavigated it because of your requirements. So yeah, and then we're obviously testing from our side as well. But Andrea, since you jumped on,
Can we just have one last question from Eileen, because I want to try and show the Power Automate, which is going to be quick and nice in a second. So just Eileen, and then Nick, maybe we can chat afterwards if you want to stay on, or Peter if we want to discuss more.
Sure.
Eileen?
Yeah, I was just going to say, really, I think that some of your January SaaS implementations are on this call, and maybe they would be happy to have a direct conversation about their experience.
That's
maybe.
True. Yeah, maybe we can hook people up afterwards if to have a chat about the realities of both the wave updates and the reporting.
Yeah, it might help.
Yeah. Hello. This is Pete on Keith's login. The answer to that is yes. I'm happy to do that.
Okay. Cheers, Pete.
I thought you might be, Pete. Well done.